You will lend to many nations, but you will not borrow. For the Lord your God has blessed you as he has promised you. You will make loans to many nations, but you will not require loans. You will dominate many nations, but they will not rule over you. Fortunate are you, O Israel, who is like you, a people delivered by the Lord, your helping shield and the sword of your glory. Your enemies will deny their identity before you, and you shall tread upon their high places. Israel will be delivered by the Lord with an everlasting deliverance. You will not be disgraced nor humiliated forever and ever. You will eat and be satiated and praise the name of the Lord your God, who has dealt with you wondrously. And my people will never be put to shame. And you will know that I am within the people of Israel, that I am the Lord your God, and there is none else, and my people will never be put to shame. For you will go out with joy and be led forth in peace. The mountains and the hills will burst into song before you, and all the trees of the field will clap hands. Indeed, God is my deliverance. I am confident and shall not fear, for God, the Lord is my strength and song, and he has been a help to me. You shall draw water with joy from the wells of deliverance, and you will say on that day, offer thanks to the Lord, proclaim his name, make his deeds known among the nations, cause it to be remembered that his name is exalted. Sing to the Lord, for he has done great things. This is known throughout the earth. Raise your voice joyously and sing, you dweller in Zion, for the Holy One of Israel is great in your midst. On that day, Israel will say, indeed, this is our God in whom we have hoped that he should deliver us. This is the Lord in whom we have hoped. Let us be glad and rejoice in his deliverance. That's from the reading we do after Havdalah on Saturday night, a series of blessings. They're just gorgeous. So many people come home from shul, make Havdalah, get on with it. But it's such a beautiful set of blessings that you can read. And it's actually best to say them with others. So I wanted to say them with you. How's everybody doing? A good vach, Shavua Tov. A good week to you. We're coming out of Shabbos and we're coming out strong. Let's light up the darkness. Who is with us? We have a spectacularly interesting page tonight. Lots to cover. Who's with us on a Saturday night? Melissa in Great Neck, Tom says Shavua Tov, Paul in the Great Northwest, Bella in Florida, Bill in Mid-Missouri, Leona from Southern Illinois, Sharon in New Jersey, Nancy in North Carolina, Suzanne in New Mexico, and Karen in Northern California. We're on the YouTube side. Spencer wishing us a good week, Shavua Tov, and Christo a good week, a week of peace. May gladness reign and your joy increase. Amen. And Gigi checking in from British Columbia. Welcome, everybody. Tonight's daf. Let's see. Tonight's daf is sponsored by Janice Schwartz, our very own Janice Schwartz. When was this? This was a little while back, okay? But this is in memory of Mincha Bas Eliezer. Her mom, may the neshama have a great aliyah. May your mom's soul have a great elevation in the world of souls. And thank you, Janice, for enabling us to share more Torah with more people around the world. May you and all your loved ones be showered in blessings, and we say amen. If you'd like to sponsor an episode of AT Daily, donate.accidentaltalmudist.org. Nino put the link in the comments. Also, if you want to get this special Friday message on WhatsApp, if you're on WhatsApp, I just send a little private message to all my friends. And we have a little Friday AT WhatsApp group. You don't get any abundance of messages. You just get one message a week on Friday, often humor or a blessing, just a thought that I share with my friends on Fridays. And Nino put that link in the comments as well. If you're looking for it, Nina, it's in the comments of the last show too, I believe. Okay, where am I? So tonight's daf is Yud Tes, page 19. Did I say something wrong? Page 19 here in Tractate Nazir, the 17th volume of the Talmud. These are the laws of nazirus, one who vows to be a nazir, to abstain from products of the grapevine, from cutting hair, from coming into contact with the dead and thereby becoming tameh, ritually impure, and to bring the offerings that a nazir brings at the conclusion of the term of nazirus. We are in chapter 3 and finally concluding our discussion of Mishna number 2, one who takes that vow of nazirus while standing in a cemetery. It's a contradiction because he's standing in a cemetery, so he's ritually impure, right? He has corpse tumor because he's standing over graves right now. What happens to this person, as we've learned, he can't start counting his days of nazirus, but the vow of nazirus does take effect. So he's bound not to drink wine, not to cut hair, even while standing in the cemetery, but he can't start counting days. When he leaves the cemetery, he's going to go through his purification. This can only happen when the temple is standing, and we have the water of sprinkling that includes the ashes of the red heifer, goes through the 7-day purification, becomes pure, then starts counting his days, and does not have to bring the offerings of impurity, which a Nazir who started the standard vow of Nazirus, he was in a state of purity when he took the vow, and then later became impure for the dead, walked into a cemetery, had contact with a corpse. And so at that point, that person is going to have to go through the purification also, but that person will shave his head and bring the offerings of impurity that a Nazir is obligated to bring when he becomes impure for the dead during his term of Nazirus. The one who starts his Nazirus while standing in the cemetery doesn't bring the offerings of impurity after the purification, but the one who became impure while a Nazir does bring those offerings. What does he bring? He brings 2 birds and a lamb, right? One bird is a sin offering, one bird is definitely a sin offering. I think the other bird is an ola, a burnt offering, and the lamb is a guilt offering, or the lamb is a burnt offering, and the other bird is a guilt offering. I can't remember, but he brings 2 birds and a lamb. And as we'll see, when he concludes his Nazirus, also brings 3 offerings, but at that point, it's a sin offering, a burnt offering, and a peace offering. That'll become relevant tonight. Okay, so we pick this up on 19a near the top. And the Gemara poses a question. Who is the Tana, right? Who's the rabbi of the Mishnaic period, who taught this that the sages taught? With regard to a woman who vowed to be a Nazir and became ritually impure, leading her to designate a bird for a sin offering. Here we go. A bird for a burnt offering and a sheep for a guilt offering. So there you go. When a Nazir becomes impure for the dead, they have to go through the purification and then bring these 3 offerings that are not the offerings the Nazir brings at the conclusion of Nazirus. These are the offerings that a Nazir has to bring because he or she became impure for the dead. And so a bird is a sin offering, a bird for a burnt offering. That's right. Sin offering is the chatas, the burnt offering is the oila, and the sheep for a guilt offering is the asham. And afterward, her husband nullified her vow of nazirus for her. So she brings the bird sin offering, and she does not bring the bird burnt offering. Now, didn't we just say that she already brought the offerings? But what they're saying in the note that Rav Steinsaltz explains, she designated these birds to be those offerings, right? She designated the sin offering. She designated the burnt offering. And then her husband nullified her vow of nazirus. Now, as we know, a husband can nullify the vows of a wife, and the father can nullify the vows of his minor daughter on the day that he hears of them. And recall, this is a leniency for those women. It's an advantage to have that your husband can nullify your vow for you, because, let's say a man doesn't have somebody who can nullify his vows for him other than a halachic authority. So he has to, make that journey, find a halachic authority, explain himself, and then depending on the situation, that rabbi or that Beis Din can nullify his vow for him. But a wife or a daughter can have her vow nullified. But the husband can only, or the father can only do that on the day he hears of her vow. So he didn't hear that she became a Nazir when she became a Nazir, but sometime later during her Nazirus and after she became impure for the dead, he hears that she made a vow of Nazirus and he nullifies it for her. So the question is going to be, now that he uprooted her vow, was she retroactively never a Nazir? Or she was a Nazir, and now, as of the moment when he cancels the vow, she's no longer a Nazir. And that would affect whether she needs to bring these offerings or not. So Rav Chisda said, this is the opinion of Rabbi Yishmael, the son of Rabbi Yochanan Baroka. According to the opinion of the rabbis, the burnt offering, right? A woman Nazir who became, and why are we talking about a woman Nazir? Because she can have her vow nullified by her husband. So according to the opinion of the rabbis, the bird designated as a burnt offering, this is a gift, and she would bring it despite the fact that her Nazirus was nullified. According to Rabbi Yishmael, the burnt offering is part of the atonement process, and since her Nazirus was nullified, there is no longer a need for atonement. What is she atoning for, right? The Torah specifies in Numbers 6 through 12, I think, that a Nazir is one who takes a vow. And during the period of Nazirus, right? No partaking of the grape product, of the grapevine, no shaving the head, no coming into contact with the dead. And if a person dies suddenly beside the Nazir, so they didn't do anything wrong, they were a Nazir, and then somebody died right next to them, and they came into contact with that corpse, nonetheless, they desecrated the holiness of their Nazirus, and have to bring these offerings, right? The sin offering, the burnt offering, and the guilt offering. Right, but now, according to one view, that when the husband nullifies that vow is entirely uprooted. So now that she became impure and owes these kind of intermediate offerings of the Nazir who became impure for the dead, but now that the husband uprooted the original vow, she doesn't have to bring these offerings. The burnt offering, yes, because it's a gift, unless the burnt offering is necessary for atonement and she no longer needs to atone. So the Gemara asks, well, what does he hold? If he holds that the husband uproots a vow entirely when he nullifies it, and she is considered as if she had never vowed at all, well, then she should not have to bring the sin offering either, as she was never a Nazir, and she does not need atonement. Why are we separating the burnt offering from the sin offering? The fact is, if the husband nullifies the vow and thereby completely uproots her vow of Nazirus, she shouldn't have to bring any offerings at all. Why are we going to leave the sin offering there and talk about the burnt offering? Conversely, if he holds that the husband severs the vow from that point onward, but it did take effect beforehand, well, then she should also bring the burnt offering, right? Because if she was in fact a Nazir and became impure for the dead, and that's why she became obligated to bring these other offerings, and then the husband nullified her Nazirus, fine. But while she was a Nazir, she became impure and she has to bring these offerings. She won't have to bring the offerings at the completion of Nazirus because now her vow is uprooted and she no longer has to finish her term or finish her days. But that she became impure for the dead while she was a Nazir, that doesn't change if when the husband nullifies the vow, it's from that point forward. As opposed to when he nullifies the vow, it uproots it retroactively. So which is it? So the Gemara answers, actually, the Tana, right, the rabbi who made this ruling holds that the husband uproots the vow. And why is she obligated to bring a sin offering? So they're saying, no, he uproots the vow entirely, like she was never a Nazir. So why would she have to bring the sin offering? We're debating whether or not she brings the burnt offering. But they're saying even though the husband uprooted the vow entirely, she still has to bring the sin offering. Why would you have to bring a sin offering for a Nazir that became impure for the dead if when the husband nullifies the vow, it's condemned retroactively that she was never a Nazir at all? Why is she still liable to bring the sin offering? And this is fascinating. Why does she have to bring the sin offering? Rabbi Yishmael holds in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Elazar HaKapar. As it is taught in a Baraisa, Rabbi Elazar HaKapar, the esteemed one, says, What is the meaning when the verse states with regard to a Nazir, this is Numbers 6:11, and make atonement for him, for he sinned by the soul. And with which soul did this person sin? By becoming a Nazir. Right? Did he sin when he desecrated his nazirus because he became impure for the dead, even accidentally? Or did he sin when he became a Nazir? Now note, even if a Nazir does not become impure for the dead during his term of nazirus, if he has a regular 30-day term, let's say for example, of nazirus, and he never desecrated it, he never drank wine or ate anything from the grapevine, never shaved his head prematurely, never became impure for the dead, completed his days, and then brings his offerings at the end, he did everything right. One of the offerings that he brings at the conclusion of nazirus is a sin offering. Why is this person who wanted to elevate himself to a higher level of sanctity by becoming a Nazir liable to bring a sin offering at the conclusion of nazirus? We can understand, okay, he desecrated the nazirus, and that's why he brings the offering of impurity when he becomes impure for the dead, and that includes a sin offering. But why is there a sin offering at the end? Right? And so that's why now they're asking, what is sinful about becoming a Nazir that causes a sin offering to be part of the conclusion of nazirus? Let's see. And make atonement for him, for he sinned by his soul. And with which soul did this person sin by becoming a Nazir? How? It is in afflicting himself by abstaining from wine. He is considered to have sinned with his own soul, and he must bring a sin offering for the nazirus itself for causing his body to suffer. And we have a kal v'chomer inference which can be learned from this, right? An a fortiori inference. Just as this person, in afflicting himself by abstaining only from wine, is nevertheless called a sinner, in the case of one who afflicts himself by abstaining from everything, through fasting or other acts of mortification, all the more so is he described as a sinner. And according to this opinion, Rabbi Yishmael holds that since the woman afflicted herself by abstaining from wine via the mechanism of becoming a Nazir, she must bring a sin offering, even though, due to her husband's nullification of that vow, she did not actually become a Nazir retroactively. Now, let me read the law on this so we have no mistake. Although one must stay away from the pursuit of the pleasures of the world when they result from jealousy, lust, and honor, it is not proper for a person to abstain from the pleasures of the world altogether and to practice self-denial. And the sages therefore directed that one should deprive himself only of things forbidden by the Torah, and he should refrain from prohibiting permitted matters to himself by means of oaths and vows. In other words, saying that you're going to take an oath or a vow and make something that would otherwise be permitted to you, you're going to turn it into something prohibited using the mechanism of a vow. This is considered sinful conduct. It's like adding to the Torah. It's not only unnecessary. Now, you might want to say, first of all, it's not, they're talking about things that are outside the realm of jealousy, lust, and honor, right? If you find that you become jealous of other people and you want to curb that instinct in yourself and you want to swear an oath, maybe that's okay. Things having to do with lust or pursuing your own honor. I'm sure that you could talk about self-destructive, like, you're going to take an oath to abstain from alcohol because you're an alcoholic. That's a separate question. But if you're just going to say, you know what, I want to hold myself to some higher level and, I just think, I can do better than to, walk on beaches. And so I'm going to take an oath to, prohibit walking on beaches to myself. So that's prohibited, right? It's prohibited for you to prohibit walking on the beach to yourself by means of an oath, right? God made many of the pleasures of the world permitted, right? I mean, you can't go sleeping around with everybody and having extramarital sex. That's prohibited. It's prohibited in the Torah. But it's permitted, to enjoy nature. It's permitted to enjoy various scents. It's permitted to listen to great music. Everything that is permitted, God created it so that you should enjoy it and you shouldn't deny yourself of it. And if you take an oath to prohibit something upon yourself so that you've made it through your oath a sin for you to partake of it, the taking of that oath is considered sinful behavior. Now, the Gemara raises a difficulty with Rabbi Elazar HaKapar's dictum. Now, but this verse, labeling the Nazir a sinner, is written with regard to an impure Nazir. And we are saying that even a pure Nazir is a sinner. And the Gemara answers, Rabbi Elazar HaKapar holds that a pure Nazir is also a sinner, right? Confirming what we're saying here, that he never had to take his vow of nazirus. No one made him take that vow. And the fact that he took it is a kind of a sin. And that's why he brings a sin offering at the end. And this is the reason that the statement that a Nazir is a sinner is written in reference to an impure Nazir rather than a pure one, since he repeated his sin, right? Because a Nazir who becomes impure for the dead has to restart his days. Maybe he vowed to be a Nazir for 100 days and he observed, 95 of them before he became impure for the dead. He's going to lose all those 95 days and he's going to have another, 95 days plus 5 more to complete the 100 where wine is prohibited to him because he took this optional, unnecessary vow. And in this view, that person is deemed a sinner for prohibiting something to himself that would otherwise be permitted using the mechanism of a vow, in this case, a vow of nazirus. Going back to the subject of one who took a vow of nazirus while in a cemetery. But before we move on, it's very interesting, right? I once heard a rabbi say that we're going to be held accountable for all the permitted pleasures that we did not enjoy while we were in this world. And I wonder if this was his source for that teaching. And I think that teaching was maybe a little bit misleading the way that it was worded. You might say that, obviously not everyone is in a situation where they're going to be able to enjoy the permitted pleasure of flying to Paris on a private jet, right? That it's not in everybody's wheelhouse to enjoy that pleasure. But, that everybody could taste a banana in their life or everybody could taste an avocado in their life and they chose not to for whatever reason, you might be held like, why didn't you enjoy this gift that I gave you? Who knows what you really held accountable for not enjoying permitted pleasures. But if you take a vow not to enjoy a permitted pleasure, that's definitely something that you'll be held accountable for because no one told you to take that vow. Now, the Mishna taught that if one took a vow of nazirus while in a cemetery, back to this subject, and then he left the cemetery, and then he entered it again, so the days he spent outside do count as part of his tally of his term of nazirus, right? We know that, right? The guy took a vow of nazirus while standing in a cemetery while he's in a state of impurity of the dead. So, of course, his days while he's standing in the cemetery don't count. He leaves the cemetery. Does he start counting days of nazirus? No. He's still not allowed to drink wine. Not while he's standing in the cemetery, not when he leaves it. But he's not counting days of nazirus yet because when he leaves the cemetery, he has to go through that 7-day purification, being sprinkled with the ashes and the water of sprinkling containing the ashes of the red heifer on the 3rd and 7th days of his 7-day purification. And then he immerses in the mikveh. And then he's pure, and now he starts counting days of nazirus. And then if he re-enters the cemetery, now he was pure as a nazir and became impure again. And so this guy's going to have to restart his tally. Whatever days he had outside the cemetery are not going to count, right? Are going to be negated with an exception, as we shall see. So if he left the cemetery and then entered it again, the days he spent outside do count as part of his tally of his term of nazirus, and he's obligated to bring the offerings of ritual impurity upon re-entering the cemetery. So the Mishnah teaches they do count as part of his tally, his days outside the cemetery. And the Gemara questions the meaning of this linkage. Does nazirus take effect for him because he merely left the cemetery, he is still ritually impure and he cannot begin counting his term of nazirus until after he has undergone the 7-day purification process. So Shmuel said the Mishna is referring to a case where he left and he received the sprinkling of the ashes of the red heifer on the 3rd day, and again he received the sprinkling on the 7th day, and he immersed in the mikveh, after which he entered the cemetery a 2nd time. Since he is now ritually pure, his nazirus takes effect. So the Gemara poses the question again. According to the precise reading of the Mishnah, his term of nazirus starts only if he re-entered the cemetery. However, is it only if he returned and entered the cemetery that those days count as part of his tally? But if he did not enter and he remained outside the cemetery, those days do not count as part of his tally? That doesn't make any sense. Why should the start of the nazirus be dependent upon re-entering the cemetery and becoming impure for the dead again? So the Gemara answers that Tana is speaking utilizing the style of it is not necessary. Meaning, it is not necessary to state this law that those days count as part of his tally when he was outside the cemetery and after he was purified, in the case of one who left the cemetery and began his nazirus. But even if he entered the cemetery again immediately after his purification, those days do count as part of his tally, and he will be obligated to bring the offerings of a ritual impurity upon his re-entry. In other words, one who takes his vow nazirus while standing in the cemetery, remember, he has to leave the cemetery, observe 7-day purification, but he doesn't shave his head or bring the offerings of impurity because he never had pure days. But if he left the cemetery, went through that purification, and then he re-entered the cemetery, so then he had at least a few days before he re-entered, well, then he had pure days. And so this guy's going to have to bring the offerings of impurity. And Rav Kahana and Rav Asi said to Rav, what is the reason you did not explain it to us with these words of Shmuel as explained above? And he said to them, well, I said to myself that perhaps you do not require that explanation, as I thought it was obvious that this is the proper explanation of the Mishnah. The Mishnah also taught an additional law. Rabbi Eliezer says this law does not apply to one who entered the cemetery on that very day he left it, as it is stated with regard to the laws of an impure Nazir, but the first days shall be void, which indicates that he does not bring the offerings unless he had first days of ritual purity, during which he observed his nazirus. Right? He has to have at least 2 days of being pure and then becoming impure again for him to have to bring the offerings of a Nazir who became impure. And Ula said, Rabbi Eliezer said this law, that 1 day of Nazir's impurity is not sufficient to obligate him to bring offerings if he became impure, only with regard to an impure person who took a vow of Nazirus. But a pure Nazir who became impure, even if he was only pure for 1 day of Nazirus, it negates that day of his tally, and he must bring the offerings of the impure Nazir when he becomes impure for the dead. Now we're on 19b. And Rav has said, what is the reason for the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer, according to Ula's explanation? And the verse states, but the first days shall be void because his consecration was ritually impure, which is explained like this. Why are his first days rendered void? They are void because he took a vow of Nazirus, consecrated himself, when he was in a state of ritual impurity. Now, Abaye raises an objection to Rava from a Baraisa that is not in accordance with the opinion of Ula. One who said, I am hereby a Nazir for 100 days. And he became ritually impure by a corpse immediately at the beginning of the 100 days. One might have thought that it should negate the time he spent as a Nazir. The verse therefore states, but the first days shall be void, which indicates that this law does not apply until he will have first days as a Nazir. And in this case, the Nazir does not have his first days completed as he became ritually impure right away. He wasn't standing in a cemetery when he took his vow of Nazirus. He said, I'll be Nazir for 100 days. He becomes a Nazir. And then, like that day or the next day, he becomes impure for the dead. He will have to bring the offerings of impurity. Does he? Then Baraisa continues. If one became ritually impure at the end of 100 days, that is on the 100th day, one might have thought it should negate the days he had counted. The verse therefore states, but the first days shall be void. indicating by inference that there are other days that can be called the last days, while this Nazir does not have last days as he has already completed the tally of his nazirus. If he became impure on the 100th day less one, on the 99th day. So one might have thought it should not negate the days he counted. Therefore the verse states, but the first day shall be void, indicating by inference that there are last ones, and this Nazir has first ones and last ones. So Abaye now concludes his objection to Rav. But with regard to this law of the Baraisa, you cannot say it is referring to an impure person who took a vow of nazirus from the fact that it teaches, I am hereby a Nazir for 100 days. And he became impure immediately at the beginning of the 100, indicating that it is discussing one who became impure after his term had already started. He wasn't standing in a cemetery. He was pure when he took the vow, and then he became impure. And it further teaches until he will have first days, which proves that Rabbi Eliezer states his law even with regard to a pure Nazir who later became impure. And this is a conclusive refutation of Ula, and his opinion is rejected. So Rav Papa said to Abaye, those first days that we said he must observe in ritual purity according to Rabbi Eliezer, does it mean that one day has finished and a second has started, so that if he became impure on the second day, it negates his tally? Or perhaps it means that 2 days have finished and a third has started, which would mean it negates his tally only if he became impure after the beginning of the third day. And an answer was not available to him. So Rav Papa went to ask Rava, who said to him, it is written, but the former days shall be void, in the plural, which means at least 2 days need to have passed. Let's just sum this up as what are we saying? Here's the law. If one became ritually impure on the first or second day of his term of nazirus, although the Rambam, Maimonides, rules that he must bring the offerings of impurity, it does not negate his previous days as a Nazir. And he continues to count from where he left off after he has brought his offerings. Wait, we've been saying over and over and over again, a Nazir who becomes impure has to start the count over again. What do you mean that his days that he's already observed as Nazir are not voided, are not negated? What are you saying? Here's what he's saying. It does not negate his previous days as a Nazir, and he continues to count from where he left off after he brought his offerings. It is only if he contracted ritual impurity from the third day onward that it negates all the previous days. As the Rambam's text is like that of the commentary on Nazir. The law follows Rabbi Eliezer, as his opinion is discussed by the Amoraim. In other words, let's say you take a vow of Nazirus for 30 days, right? If you become impure for the dead on the 7th day, or on the 15th day, or on the 21st day, or on the 28th day, so then all the days you already counted are negated. You go through your purification process, 7 days, shave your head, bring the offerings of impurity, and then you start counting again 30 days. But if you became impure on the first or second day, those days aren't negated. You get to include those in your count. So when you come back from your 7-day purification, let's say you had 2 days impurity as a Nazir. So when you come back from your purification process, you owe 28, not the full 30. It's an interesting little, I wouldn't call it a loophole, but it's an interesting little leniency that you get according to the sage's reading of the law. So the Gemara comments, and it was necessary for the verse to write days, and it was also necessary for it to write the verb shall be void in the plural. For if the merciful one wrote in the Torah only days, had not written also the verb shall be void in the plural, I would say that the law applies only if 2 days have finished and a third has started. And the merciful one therefore writes in the Torah the plural form of shall be void. And if the merciful one wrote in the Torah shall be void in the plural and had not written days in the plural, I would say even 1 day. That is, the law applies even if he became ritually impure on the first day. The merciful one therefore wrote in the Torah days, indicating that he must have observed at least part of the second day. So if you become impure on the second or third day of Nazirus, then you're going to get either 2 or 3 days, or either, 1 or 2 days. No, I think 2 or 3 days that you're going to get to keep in your tally, and you won't owe when you restart your Nazirus after purification. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 2 here in chapter 3. Now, here is Mishnah number 3. It's a short night. I'm going to read this Mishnah, and then I'll go to questions and comments. But this is a really interesting Mishnah. Mishnah number 3 of chapter 3. One who vowed many days of Nazirus while outside of the land of Israel, and who vowed many days of Nazirus while inside of the land of Israel, and who vowed many days of Nazirus while inside of the land of Israel, and who vowed many days of Nazirus while inside of the land of Israel, and who vowed many days of Nazirus while inside of the land of Israel, and who vowed many days of Nazirus while inside of the land of Israel, and who vowed many days of Nazirus while inside of the land of Israel, and who vowed many days of Nazirus while inside of the land of Israel, and who vowed many days of Nazirus while inside of the land of Israel, and who vowed many days of Nazirus while inside of the land of Israel, and who vowed many days of Nazirus while inside of the land of Israel, and who vowed many days of Nazirus while inside of the land of Israel, and who vowed many days of Nazirus while inside of the land of Israel, and who vowed many days of Nazirus while inside of the land of Israel, and who vowed many days of Naz And this is Israel when the temple is standing. Okay, now this is really interesting, right? We've had this question come up. Can you be a Nazir outside of Israel? Yes and no. One who vowed many days of nazirus while outside of the land of Israel, and he completed his nazirus, and afterwards he came to the land of Israel in order to bring the offerings at the end of his nazirus. Right? You can only end nazirus by bringing offerings in the holy temple in Jerusalem when the temple is standing. So this person vowed to be a Nazir while standing outside of Israel, observed his days of Nazirus outside of Israel, and then he traveled to Israel to bring his offerings in the temple. So about this person, Beis Shammai say, he must be a Nazir for 30 days, so that he has observed a term of Nazirus in ritual purity in the land of Israel. And Beis Hillel say, now the law usually follows Beis Hillel over Beis Shammai, and it does here. And usually Beis Hillel is the more lenient opinion, which the law follows. But in this case, Beis Hillel say he is a Nazir from the beginning, meaning he must observe his entire Nazirus again. So if he took an unspecified term of Nazirus, he did 30 days outside the land of Israel, he has to do 30 days of Nazirus in the land of Israel. But if he took a vow of Nazirus for a year, and he observed it outside the land of Israel, and then he comes to Israel to bring his offerings, according to the law, which is according to Beis Hillel, he has to do another year of Nazirus in Israel. You could call it Nazirus tourism. Now, the Mishna cites a related story. So an incident occurred with regard to Queen Helene, whose son had gone to war, and she said, if my son will return from war safely, I will be a Nazir for 7 years. Now, who was Queen Helene? Fascinating character. Let me read you this note about Queen Helene. Helene, or in Greek, Bill could probably pronounce this properly. I think it's like Helene. She was the queen of Adiabene, a small country subjugated in the Parthian Empire located on the Tigris River, and it was situated in what is today northern Syria. More than a generation prior to the destruction of the Second Temple, Helene and her 2 sons, Munbaz and Itzatz, converted to Judaism, apparently along with much of the local nobility in that kingdom. And Queen Helene and her 2 sons maintained strong ties to the Jewish community in the land of Israel, and they would send substantial gifts to the temple and enormous sums of money to assist the poor in the years of drought. It is plausible that the members of the royal family of Adiabene are buried in the magnificent graves of the kings in Jerusalem. And as mentioned in the Talmud, Queen Helene was a righteous convert who accepted upon herself all elements of halacha, of Jewish law, as taught to her by the sages. Right? So this is a righteous convert, a queen, who sent enormous sums of money at tzedakah to Israel in times of drought to help the poor of Israel. And I'm sure she supported, yeshivas and Torah academies in Israel as well. So this would be like your big macher, right? In other words, like your major donor that you would bend over backwards to make sure, they got taken care of properly. So this incident occurred where Queen Helene, her son went to war, and she made a vow that if her son will return home safely, she'll be a Nazir for 7 years. And her son returned safely from the war. And she observed that vow. She was a Nazir for 7 years. Where was she a Nazir for 7 years? In Adiabene, in her kingdom, right? In her queendom, where she's a queen. And so she observes Nazirs for 7 years. And at the end of the 7 years, she ascended to the land of Israel, and Beis Hillel instructed her in accordance with their opinion that she should be a Nazir for an additional 7 years in the land of Israel. And at the end of those 7 years, she became ritually impure and was therefore required to observe yet another 7 years of Nazirus, presumably in the land of Israel, as ritual impurity negates the total of the tally of a Nazir. And she was found to be a Nazir for 21 years. Rabbi Yehuda said, don't exaggerate. She was a Nazir for only 14 years and not 21. But talk about a righteous convert who took the law seriously and did what she had to do to comply, with the law properly. Why did she take such a vow? I mean, I'm sure she was in a very emotional state, worried, sick about her son returning from war. Sort of made this deal with God. If my son will return home safely, I'll be a Nazir for 7 years. The son returned. She observed the Nazirs for 7 years. She probably didn't know at that time that she needed to observe her Nazirs in the land of Israel for it to count. And when she learned that, I guess she was, ruler from afar. Must have been continued ruling her kingdom or queendom from the land of Israel so that she could fulfill the terms of her vow. Wow. So that's where we'll stop for tonight. I'm going to go to questions and comments, but tomorrow we'll pick it up with the Gemara on that Mishna. Okay. What have we got on Nazir 19? Come on. Okay. Bill. And yet, despite fasters and Nazirites being sinners, there are indeed occasions which the leaders of the community would call for public fasts. So how do we square these two views? Right. Well, if the sages are calling for a public fast, it's because the nation has sinned, right? And we're being held accountable, and that's why there's a drought. Or that's why there's a plague, or that's why there's something, right? And so we're saying, we're trying to elevate our behavior and impress God with our devotion. And then as collectively, we're taking on a public fast. And there's a mechanism for doing that. And that is definitely not, kind of an unnecessary restriction on oneself that's taken by means of a vow, right? Doing a public fast, you don't necessarily vow to do a public fast. You just observe the public fast, right? So what the real distinction there is you're not going to be held accountable for denying yourself something if there's a reason to do it, or even just for denying yourself something without a good reason. What is considered sinful is to take a vow and render something prohibited to yourself that would otherwise be permitted. Remember, when you take a vow before the Lord, you just change the world, right? Like you've actually made a law for yourself that this thing which you now vow to make prohibited to yourself, if you then eat it, now you've committed a sin. Whereas otherwise it wouldn't have been a sin. And the sages are saying, at least according to this ruling of Nazir Bar Kapar, that was sinful to take on such a vow. Who are you to say you know better than God what should be permitted to you and what shouldn't? Now, you may decide to just abstain from things for, various reasons, but you don't do it with a vow. That's the key. Also, Bill telling me how to pronounce Helene, like it's spelled in English, Helene. And Bill would say you pronounce that Elena or Helena. Helena, thank you. Also, this wasn't the only time this happened, this conversion. A similar thing happened in the kingdom of Himyar in what is now Yemen in about 400-ish CE. Right, obviously, many people have converted to Judaism over the years, but when you're talking about a group of nobles doing it collectively, it's an unusual event and certainly worth noting. All right, that's what I've got for us this evening. It's great learning with you on a Saturday night, getting the week started off right. And with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow, 6 p.m. Pacific. And, hopefully the Super Bowl's over by then. But we'll be teaching at 6. And Monday, scheduled to be the regular class. Just giving you the heads up, Tuesday, we won't have class. So I'll probably try to do a double page on Monday night. Tuesday, Nina and I have a conflict with a event here in the Jewish community in LA. Have a good night and a good week.